So tonight I want to review AEW Dynamite, and I do want to say that again with AEW they always have like their ups and downs with the company, and tonight represented a lot of like really strong strengths and a lot of very strong weaknesses. And I'm actually recording this at 9:50 because I chose not to watch the main event between Comedy Kicks, Orange Cassidy, and Hechicero, and as I said about Orange Cassidy, he's not that good of a wrestler. He doesn't take it seriously. If his gimmick is just doing silly kicks, that's not somebody who should be main eventing your show. And then also, most people don't know who Hechicero is, so it's just not a good choice of a main event. And that's kind of been a concurrent issue with AEW, a consistent issue, is that they have very, very poor main events of their show, really. You need to have something more compelling, something that really is a way to push like new stars and whatever, really, or just push people on the roster that you want to get over eventually, so I just don't see why AEW just consistently does that thing where they're just going to like make Orange Cassidy or whoever main event, really. They could have easily had Ricochet and Shibata main event, or somebody that has some popularity, really, or they could have ended with a Tony Storm segment, or they could have done something with a lot more appeal, really. So I just don't get why they have to consistently have Orange Cassidy in the main event. The other thing with the show is that they do too much dumb comedy, and I think that they're getting to the point where I think that they have fun with it, but they have to understand that it's just detrimental to their crowd and detrimental to like their show, really. It's ultimately like that old saying, you gotta like not work with your favorite paints, in order to be a successful artist, really. But they seem to love the comedy too much. But otherwise, the show started very, very strong, and then it fell apart towards the end. So I'm going to review the entire show. And I also want to mention that I'm going to Dynasty in like 3 weeks, really. It's gonna. I really hope this pay-per-view is strong, because this is like 3 weeks after Revolution, so I hope that they make this a strong show. The first thing that happened was Kenny Omega opens the show with pyrotechnics, and you see like these large pillars of fire behind him. He gets a large roar from the Fresno, California crowd, and it looks like there's a fan in the audience that wants to give him like roses and presents, but he doesn't accept that, being humble. He gets a loud crowd reaction. This shows that he has a big star feel, because a lot of times there are people who open the show that are not really big stars, or sometimes, like we talked about with when Moxley became champion, they had Daniel Garcia, Private Party, the Dark Order, Orange Cassidy, and other people who are not deserving champions. This is just a reminder to everybody. Hey, you know what? We have somebody that's of a champion caliber opening our show. Great opening, and he says things like, thanks for the support. I thought I couldn't. I thought I couldn't call Will Ospreay a friend, and I appreciate Will Ospreay. He says something along those lines. This kind of teases a Will Ospreay Kenny Omega feud, or just a rivalry. I mean, thanks to Takeshita, because Takeshita brought the best in him, and I like that because it's good to put over like the people that were holding the title that you defeated, because you got to make Takeshita look relevant. And he confuses the audience because he explains the international tournament, and the way he says that is he makes it sounds like he makes it sound like that whoever wins the tournament is the champion, gains his title, and then he faces them for that. So his wording was a little confusing. So I think what he should have said was that we're having a tournament, and the champion of that tournament wins a number one contendership against me at AEW Dynasty. So you got to kind of speak a lot more clearly, and that's been an issue with AEW. So he kind of confused me a little bit with that. So the next match that they had was the Ops, Hook, Samoa Joe, and Shibata versus Jobbers. I did not like that, and I didn't really like this match because it's very predictable. They don't get on the microphone saying, "Hey, we want to challenge the Death Riders for the titles" or whatever. There's no sense of progression, really, outside of setting up, Shibata versus Ricochet because they're going to have a match in Collision. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate Shibata getting the pinfall since he's going to be facing Ricochet in a match for the International Championship in that tournament. It makes sense for Shibata to get the pinfall. And I really respect that because in many situations they'll be like, hey, Samoa Joe's the biggest star, give it to Joe, or let's give it to Hook because Hook is somebody that they like to suck his balls on, really. So I really appreciate them just choosing the right person to get a pinfall. And it making sense. Ricochet does a promo. He gives Shibata the option to not have the match so he can move forward in the tournament. Ricochet mentions that his goal is to win a world title again, which is good storytelling. It's great heel work. I really look forward to Ricochet versus Shibata. I actually think it's going to be Ricochet versus Kenny Omega. That sounds like a pay-per-view caliber match. So it's announced that Moxley and Adam Copeland are going to have a street fight for the AEW Championship next week. Hell yes, I'm lking forward to that. And Copeland talks about it. He says that, because obviously it turned into a three-way match and he wasn't pinned, that, they just need to have like a final showdown. And yeah, like that's a really good main event. That's something that I think we all want to see, and definitely, just to have a main event that's going to draw people and actually a real main event. I really hope that I really think that's going to be a good show next week. And then the other thing about this is hopefully it will main event Dynamite. Hopefully they won't have Orange Cassidy or somebody else main eventing, really. So hopefully they have a lot more self-control out of who should be, or what segment should main event. Swerve Strickland does a promo. He mentions that he wants a title shot at Dynasty. So, and then what happens is that he mentions that, he's the first, that last year at Dynasty, he was the first black champion. And then, he wants history to repeat itself by becoming a champion again at Dynasty this year. And, some people get a little offended when he says first black champion, but it's that argument of representation versus normalization. Normalization means you shouldn't acknowledge that anybody's a champion because of their race, gender, skin color, sexual orientation, or whatever, really, because, it's like it stands out, really, like versus saying, okay, it should stand out because it shows that progression is happening, really. So, some people are for him being like a proud black man, being a black champion. And then there's some people who just say, hey, you shouldn't always be pointing out race because it kind of feels like it's not, you're treating like as not really a normal thing. Like it's just like this really big thing. So I like that argument that people talk about with him, and that's a very interesting thing. The reason why I find it interesting is because like the Hurt Syndicate are all about normalization and not having any Uncle Tom type of behavior or stereotypical black man behavior. And one of the black stereotypes is when a black person accomplishes everything, they're like, okay, it's because I'm black, or I'm the first black man to do this or that, really. So so it would be interesting, like it could be interesting, like feud between the Hurt Syndicate and Swerve Strickland over that philosophy of normalization versus, constructive celebration. That would be really interesting, and I think they should explore that, but I don't think AEW is smart enough to do that. Adam Copeland walks on camera, and then he says something like, I didn't win tonight, so... I didn't win tonight, and that makes no sense, really. Like, didn't he lose on Sunday night, and now it's Wednesday, so that's bad continuity, So again, this could have been filmed, after, after Revolution. They could have said, hey guys, stick around, or let's just film some segments and let's just air them so you guys have some time off, really. But that was just really, really stupid. They have to watch this continuity, because if he says, I lost the match tonight, it's revealed that this was taped after Revolution on Sunday. So you have to be careful at that. And whoever's in charge of these segments and editing and all this stuff, if they're not catching that stuff, that person needs to be fired, because AEW needs to be a lot more professional. If this was WWE, this would not be happening. You do not do that, because you confuse the audience, and then you guys look amateur, and it looks like, you can't have somebody... And filmmaking there's a person called continuity or a script supervisor to make sure continuity happens, and they need to have that in AEW. The next match, the opening match with Powerhouse Hobbs and Hologram versus Dreg Listigo and Brian Cage. In my opinion, you know, there was really no match on this card, and there was really no match on this card that I kind of felt should have main evented. But Hobbs and Hologram should have main evented out of the few matches that they had tonight. And then the second group of people that should have main evented was the wild card with Mordos. I would have said that could have been a good main event to establish Mike Bailey. That should have main evented really, but not Orange Cassidy and Hachishiro. So this match, Hologram and Drag Listigo exchange arm drags in the start. Brian Cage does a press slam to Hologram. Hologram counters that into a Hurricane Rana. Hologram does a second rope dive. Brian Cage catches him on the outside ring area and counters him with a vertical suplex. There's a bunch of holy shit chants. It's announced that Will Ospreay is going to appear later tonight and address the crowd. And I really like that because it gives you something to look forward to as you're watching the show. Hey, we're going to see Ospreay. I was very mad because they had Harley Cameron dress up as a luchador, and she's going by the name Harley Graham. So this is kind of like what I said about AEW, that if I was in charge of the show, I would just tell Harley Cameron, you're not doing that, and I will fire you on the spot, because there's a lot of people who want to see her become a champion. There's this underdog element to her. Why are you sticking her in stupid comedy? And she is her own worst enemy with a lot of wrestlers in AEW. She is her own worst enemy. Like, she may just say, you know what, I just want to be a funny girl and all that stuff. And the problem is that, there's more money in Harley Cameron going after the AEW Women's Championship, or you give it to, like, Megan Bayne, and then you have Megan Bayne as the women's champion, and then you have Harley Cameron beat her. Like, there has to be some element of building Harley Cameron into a serious star, into a fan favorite, because she does have that potential. So you have to prevent her from fuck around segments like this, really. So this is a very fucking poor booking of her. Powerhouse Hobbs does a power slam to Brian Cage. Hologram does a setup Rana to drag Listigo. Brian Cage does a suplex to Hobbs. Hobbs does a running power slam to drag Listigo, which looked very vicious. Hologram does a standing moonsault off the chest of Hobbs to Brian Cage. Hobbs hits a spine buster to drag Listigo for the win. And I was like saying to myself, Hobbs really doesn't get pinfalls, and Shibata doesn't get pinfalls, but at least in these two matches you had new people getting like pinfalls, but you're setting up other things. And it looks like they're setting up Hobbs and Hologram versus the Murder Machine. So I'm a little worried about this because, if you set up Jericho versus Powerhouse Hobbs for the ROH Championship on a pay-per-view or a Ring of Honor pay-per-view, that would make a lot of money. But they're really stuck on Bandito versus Chris Jericho, and most people don't know who the fuck Bandito is, and Bandito, we don't know if he can cut a promo or whatever, really, so it's almost like, once again, it's just poor choices, it's poor booking. You would want to have Hobbs with a large personality, with large bravado, and really just like, somebody who can talk and be intense, really. Go against Chris Jericho, a guy who was good on the microphone. Like, that's such a really great dynamic, but you're wasting it on Jericho and Bandito. And Bandito, we don't know if he speaks English that well, because I know he's a Mexican wrestler. Yes, there are people who are Mexican that can speak English that well, but then there are people in AEW who are luchadors and they don't English like their second language, or they speak mostly Spanish. So I don't want to see Bandito yelling in Spanish against Chris Jericho, because that just looks stupid and awkward, really. Like, Hobbs versus Jericho is where the money's at. But I think Hologram and Hobbs is not a great team. It's they should be booked better. Like, Hologram should be facing Commander for the ROH TV Championship. Powerhouse Hobbs should be facing Chris Jericho for the Ring of Honor TNT Ring of Honor World title, really. So I really hope that I really think that the Hobbs is almost like in the is in like the there to be there type of vortex. So he needs to kind of like really say, hey, I got to have a direction. I got to go after titles. I got to be somebody. I just can't be there to be there. I got to have a direction towards a title and a title reign and reestablishing myself and not just a floater on the roster. And I really feel that he's becoming a floater. So I'm worried about that. They do a segment with the Hurt Syndicate, and MVP's giving them like vacation time. They make a joke about saying, "Hey, MVP, we're gonna do gym time on our vacation time." So I like this because later on you don't see MVP and MJF, having a talk, really, because you kind of set it up early. That it's going in one direction, then you swerve people later on, really. So I like that. Toni Storm does her segment. She's very over with the crowd. I like her comedy. And she says things like, "With glass in my ass, this champ is still this tramp is still the champ. A new beginning. We have the most talented women's locker room. I bleed like a pig, and I'll eat you like a lion. You'll never hear me meow because I'm not no pussy. Women, I will be messy, and I'll always be sweaty, but I'll always be timeless." Something like that. I'm paraphrasing. And it really sounds like, from what she's saying, it sounds like she's going to have a feud with Mercedes Moné. And what happens is that doesn't happen. They're setting up Megan Bayne versus Toni Storm. And I'm not happy with that because we haven't heard Megan Bayne speak on the microphone. And when you have like wrestlers like Toni Storm hold a championship, they should always be with a partner that talks in the microphone, that has a lot of like... that can kind of talk on their level, really. Like Adam Copeland versus Swerve, they both can talk on the microphone. Takeshita cannot talk on the microphone. So if you do Takeshita versus Mike Bailey, because Mike Bailey wasn't talking a lot tonight, that would kind of work out, really. You have to play off people's strengths, really. And I don't want to see Megan Bayne just be like this big, silent powerhouse woman, really, because she kind of comes off like a female Great Khali, really. You have to kind of... If she can talk, she can talk. If Penelope Ford can talk for her, then that dynamic has to be worked out, really. But you have to present Megan Bayne as somebody who can match. Somebody has to match, the talking skills of Toni Storm. That otherwise, it feels like it's such a jarring dynamic. So MJF gives a promo, and then what happens is that MVP comes out. It's revealed that they have a history together, and MVP like says things like, you're whining, you are not hurting people like we do. You're not feared in the locker room. People have lost respect for you. MVP wants him to join the Hurt Syndicate. MJF says he doesn't need anybody's help. And they're teasing, and to me, I feel like they're teasing two things. That MJF could join the Hurt Syndicate, or MJF could be too prideful, and then MVP feels disrespected. So then you're going to see MVP... what you're going to do is that maybe what's going to happen is MJF disrespects MVP, says, I'm bigger than the Hurt Syndicate, or I don't need you, and then you're going to set up Bobby Lashley versus MJF, which would be a really great match. And that would actually be something really interesting, so that could be set up, really. I would like to see Bobby Lashley versus MJF, really. They swerve everybody and do that. The next match is they have an open challenge between Takeshita and Max Caster. And I'm not liking this because, Max Caster, like I said, if you give him victories and you actually had him set up a match between him and Anthony Bowens, the undefeated Max Caster, on Dynamite, Collision, and ROH, and having good matches, and then you set him up against Anthony Bowens and have Anthony Bowens beat him and make Anthony Bowens like a new star because he can talk in the microphone. That's a better usage of both of them. But Max Caster does his dumb comedy. People laugh along with him. And then the other thing that happens is Takeshita's there. He's yelling in Japanese. And this is kind of like a step down for him. Because, he went from a champion to doing this, like, comedy gag type of thing. I understand that he's pissed. There's continuity in this. But it's like, what are you going to do with Takeshita afterwards? Is he going to sit at home? Or is he going to be like, Mr. Screaming Japanese Man and all that stuff, really. So I feel that I'm a little worried that, Takeshita may take a step backwards, and there may be no, like, direction with him after Kenny Omega took his title, really. What about Takeshita versus Daniel Garcia? What about Takeshita saying, what about the Owen Hart tournament, and you establish that and Takeshita enters in it, and you kind of make a legitimate, case for him, or you have him and Kyle Fletcher become a tag team. There's so many things that you can do with him to make sure he doesn't lose relevancy, but this was a bad look for him. He's involved in stupid ass Max Caster comedy, and then the announcers and everybody's laughing along like, hey, you know what? It's funny backstage when we talked about it, now we're doing it. It's just a bad usage of them. It's a downgrade. Chris Jericho does a promo, and I know I've talked about this before, where Jericho and Hobbs is good, but he talks about how he insulted and disrespected and assaulted a Gravity, and Gravity is Bandino's brother. So they're really trying to set up Chris Jericho versus Bandito, and then also too, Chris Jericho's just holding up the mask and everything like that. Really, so it does kind of look like, as I said before, it seems like he has his idea, which is holding up a mask, acting intimidating, or holding up a mask and trying to act twisted. But it just comes off as stupid and a dumb superhero villain. It just comes off as very corny. So I just I was looking at that and saying, nah, you just look really, really fucking you look really fucking stupid, Chris Jericho. The next thing that I want to say is that I don't have it in my I lost my page in my notes, but there was the Christian Cage segment. And he makes a bunch of excuses. He gets a bunch of laughs from the crowd, and then Nick Wayne kind of says, "Hey, you're making excuses." And it looks like they're setting up Nick Wayne versus Christian Cage, and that just is not going to be a good one. As some people are saying, that Christian Cage got buried, and this is a further burial because you're kind of seeing Christian being a stupid jackass. He acted out of character. And now he's trying to put over Nick Wayne, a guy who's skinny as a rail, looks like a high school freshman. And Nick Wayne is nowhere on the level of Darby Allin. There's really no appeal to Nick Wayne. Has he ever won matches? He's kind of like a jobber. Is he on Ring of Honor winning matches on that show where he's building up a momentum? At least he, is he beating AR Fox or other people that are kind of on his level, really? It just... Is he facing Daniel Garcia, really? There's opponents that are kind of on the level or the body look of Nick Wayne. But Nick Wayne versus Christian will be a bad feud. It would bury Christian. And then if Christian gets a pinfall, Nick Wayne gets a pinfall on Christian, that's going to further bury him. Because it's this guy who's been a multiple-time champion, who has a legacy for over 50 years, he's losing to a guy who looks like a high school freshman. So I just think that this is just a very, very bad call. This is a burial Christian Cage. He may do the CM Punk thing where he may just put over Nick Wayne and then just write out his contract, and then just disappear, really. But this is a bad. This looks very bad for Christian. The next match was Will Nightingale versus Penelope Ford. I didn't really watch this match because I kept seeing a couple of really just bad segments. So I was very withdrawn from this. And obviously, Penelope Ford's going to lose because, Willow is one of the favorites. And then the other thing I was saying, too, is that they set up, they had Chris Statlander, they had Penelope Ford attacks Willow with a chair. Chris Statlander saves Willow. And then Megan Bayne knocks both Willow and Chris Statlander out. So it's going to set up Penelope Ford and Megan Bayne versus Chris Statlander and Willow. And that's a little confusing because it's almost like didn't Megan Bayne attack Toni Storm? So now she's in this tag team thing. So what are they going to do with the women's world title? I would like to see a ladder match or something like that where they're trying to set up multiple women. That would be really, really good. But I think they're going to just have Megan Bayne, really. But it doesn't make sense that you're putting her in two segments like this. I understand why they're doing that because it makes her look dominant if she's in two segments. And I appreciate them being experimental, really. But like I've said before, that Penelope Ford needs to be the manager of Megan Bayne. Penelope Ford needs to kind of, be loud and proud and rowdy, really. Or Megan Bayne needs to, bury her and then have Saraya be the manager of Megan Bayne, really. But Megan Bayne, she either needs to start speaking or Megan Bayne needs a manager to speak for her because that would be a good dynamic against Toni Storm. The next thing was Mercedes Moné and the Billy Starks segment. They're setting up a match between Billy Starks and Mercedes Moné for the TBS title next week. Um, I'm not a fan of Billy Starks. She has a lot of potential, but she kind of comes off like a timid little girl. Like she has a lot of anxiety, and I hate to be an asshole, but she has like a very horrible fashion sense. Like one time at the Ring of Honor Supercard of Honor show, she looked like a fucking art teacher with the overalls and everything like that. She looked like a fucking art teacher or a kindergarten teacher. And then in this segment, she looks very fucking terrible with like her dress, like the flower dress. It honestly looks like she stole it from her grandmother's 1960s high school wardrobe. Like somebody needs to be in charge of her wardrobe and be like, hey, you know what? You just look really off-putting with how you dress. Really, there's some people who don't have the best fashion sense. Just like when my dad used to pick out my clothes when I was in high school, with how he would always make me wear short shorts and show off my legs, or my sexy legs as he called it. Or when I was in high school, he would always make me wear sweaters or make me look like like some some sissy on from like Nantucket or whatever. Some people just don't know how to dress people or dress themselves or have a good idea on fashion, and Billy Starks is that. The other thing that I want to say is that they should have shown clips of Billy Starks and all the stuff she's been doing in Ring of Honor, all the victories, all the matches that she's had. Like they really just set her up very, very poorly in this. They could have done more to show her legitimacy. Like you could have cut the Max Caster and Takeshita thing out, and could have developed Billy Starks more, because you need more women stars that can step up to the plate. Really, I want to say, in my opinion, the women's division has drastically improved. It was kind of dead for a long time. It had a lot of issues, really, but there is a bunch of improvement. It's probably around like maybe like a C minus, but there's a lot of a growing room that it needs to have, really. But it's definitely improved from like a 0 and a F, really. There's a lot of growing room, but Billy Starks, like I said, like they could have just showed a lot more clips of Billy Starks and Ring of Honor to show what she's done. So it's like, hey, watch Ring of Honor. It's like our NXT, really. You see these people who are now challenging for titles and on the main roster, really. And then also, like I've said, she needs to stop acting shy and timid. It does not work for her. She needs to kind of be like a confident underdog. She needs to be a more serious underdog. Like I would say, your Harley Cameron could be the bubbly and big character type, and Billy Starks could be more of the more like the Bryan Danielson, like the I'm never gonna give up. I have something to prove. You know what? Don't underestimate me, and I'm always gonna keep coming back. Like some type of resiliency and determination, but timid, or like her holding her arms and acting like a little like afraid of Mercedes. Or out of place, really. It translates to her being out of place. It doesn't translate to her being a determined rookie. It just doesn't work unless she kind of has a storyline where she's overcoming her lack of confidence. And I've been there as a human being, or I felt out of place a lot, really. So I kind of see that, but I think that for her, she needs to understand she needs to understand the presentation that's going to help her and the presentation that's not going to help her. The last thing that I watched was the Will Ospreay interview, and he mentions the Owen Hart tournament, and he also says things like, people trust me to be the world champion, and he also tells a funny joke where he got in trouble with his missus because he decided to jump off the cage and everything like that, really. So I like Will Ospreay because his character's very animated, his wrestling style's very animated, he's very animated music, really. So when he does the comedy, it doesn't come off as cringe, or it doesn't feel like forced, or it doesn't feel out of place, really. He knows how to fluctuate between confident and determined, confident and overachieving, confident and making AEW a better place, really. And that's why he's over with a lot of people, because he gives a shit about AEW, really. So, in the Owen Hart tournament, yes, I would like to see that, but I would also say that I would really, really pray that for the Owen Hart tournament, they started at AEW Dynasty, because they need to have more matches for that card, and Will Ospreay needs to be on that card. Like we say, like Will Ospreay versus Takeshita, or Will Ospreay versus Kenny Omega trying to like be a double champion, or Will Ospreay versus Adam Copeland or Swerve, or other people in the Owen Hart tournament. You can start that at Dynasty and have because Will Ospreay needs to be on every pay per view. He's definitely a pay per view draw. So I really think that you need to do something. So you could even have him against Speedball Mike Bailey or whatever, really. So I really think that, I hope that he's on the card. And if it helps them AEW out at all, have Will Ospreay win the Owen Hart tournament, or do something where, you have some matches at Dynasty. And I actually like this a lot better because, it kind of hints of two things. Like, maybe Darby Allin's going to come back early from Mount Everest, or maybe they're going to say, you know what, we need to throw Darby Allin out of this. It's not going to be Darby Allin versus Moxley at All In. It's going to be Will Ospreay versus Moxley, or Will Ospreay versus Swerve, or, Will Ospreay versus Copeland or something like that. Because Darby versus Moxley, it seems like they've been holding out for that, and that's what they want to do for All In. But a lot of people are predicting that, so they have to swerve really to make it different. But also, too, people are not liking what they're doing with the Death Riders, so that's not good. And then the last thing was that there was a segment with Jon Moxley. Again, he talks like Bray Wyatt, where it's ambiguous, it's confusing, doesn't make a lot of sense, really. It's like an unintelligent, bastardized Dostoevsky ramble. Like, as somebody said, it sounds like a drunk man on poetry night, really, So like I said, it just doesn't work, really. He needs to be up front of the crowd talking like that, and maybe he's going to get some bit of a reaction, really. I just think that, as I said, the backstage segments with Moxley, that needs to stop, really. He needs to be in front of the crowd and talk like that and just see what happens, really. But yeah, like I've said before, and I'll say it again, that the main event was Hechicero versus Orange Cassidy. Orange Cassidy's going to win. Do you think they're going to have Hechicero, a person that is not over, that he's not over in AEW. Most people don't know who the fuck he is, really, win. And then also, why would I watch this match? Because Orange Cassidy, his gimmick is that he doesn't take wrestling too seriously. And then also, Tony Khan sucks his balls, really, so Mr. Common Kicks is going to win. So I decided not to watch that match. But overall, it's like what I've said many times with AEW, that they do have a consistent issue of bad formatting. And I felt the formatting was very good on this show up until the main event. Like, the main event should have been, like, Speedball Mike Bailey versus Mordos or Orange Cassidy. Or you could have, like, found, like, maybe Takeshita or something like that. You could have found you could have done something like that, really. The main event should have not been Hechicero versus Orange Cassidy. That was a very bad choice. Many of the characters were involved in a lot of comedy segments. Christian got nerfed, really, but you're setting up Swerve versus Moxley, which people want to see. Copeland versus Moxley in a street fight next week. That's a good draw for your next week's show. And then, the fatal four-way match for the International Championship contendership, that's good. You don't know if they're going to do the set up match for the Owen Hart tournament. That's something to set up, really. So they have some exciting things, really. But and also, too, I'm happy with Toni Storm being the champion and having charisma and all that. So that's good. And then also, too, you're going to feature Billie Starkz. And she needs to really prove herself in the match. They really need to kind of make it a good showing of Billie Starkz. And if she's kind of like timid or buried, or she's kind of like wimpy or whatever, really, it's just going to fucking bury her. And they can't bury Billie Starkz, Again, if they fuck her up, then she has to go to NXT where they won't fuck her up, So, like I said, do you want to take people like her and make her learn from Ricky Starks? Do you actually want to, like, develop her? Or be like, hey, you're not being that well developed, really. And with Hobbs, I hope he has a better direction. He's not floating on the roster because WWE will give him a call. So it's a 50-50 show, but in my opinion, the negatives outweigh the positives. So definitely a very faulty show. They need to work more on formatting. They need to work more on putting people in better segments. And they also had to do a lot of nerfing of people. Christian was nerfed. Hobbs was nerfed. He had a random match. Takeshita was nerfed. So they need to just stop nerfing people because that's one of the biggest issues of this company.